Every Friday at 6:15, I started the car, pulled out of the driveway and drove my wife to a man named Daniel's house. I carried her bag to the curb. I kissed her on the cheek. I told her to have a good time with her friends. And then I watched her walk up that stone path, and I drove home alone, and I made myself dinner, and I waited for her to text me good night. I did that for 53 Fridays in a row, and I never said a single word. Stay with me on this, because the part that finally broke me open is not the betrayal. It is what I discovered about myself in those 53 drives home, and I still have trouble saying it out loud. My name is Marcus, and I want to start by telling you something that took me a long time to admit. I am not by nature a confrontational person. I never have been. My mother used to say I came out of the womb already trying to keep the peace, and I think she was right. I am the kind of man who will sit in the wrong seat on a plane rather than ask someone to move. I will send back a meal in my head 100 times and never once raise my hand to the waiter. That is just who I am. And for most of my life, I thought that was a virtue. I met Renee at a work conference in Nashville. I was 31. She was 29. She walked into the hotel lobby pulling a bright red suitcase and arguing cheerfully on her phone with someone about a spreadsheet, and I remember thinking, that is the most alive person I have ever seen in a Holiday Inn. We ended up at the same dinner that night, seated across from each other, and she talked with her hands and laughed too loud and ordered the most expensive thing on the menu without even glancing at the price, and I thought, I am going to marry this woman. I did. 2 years later, in a small ceremony in her parents' backyard in Chattanooga, 50 people, string lights, her grandmother crying through the entire thing. It was exactly what she wanted, and I would have stood up in front of 1,000 strangers if that is what she'd asked. For 8 years, I thought we were happy. Not perfect, not the way people pretend in photos, but real happy. The kind where you bicker about whose turn it is to call the plumber, and you still reach for each other's hand in a parking lot without thinking about it. The kind where Sunday morning feels like the best thing in the world. Just coffee and the news and her feet on your lap. Renee worked in event planning. She was extraordinary at it. She could walk into a raw, empty space and immediately tell you exactly what it needed to become. Her brain worked that way. Visual, spatial, always 3 steps ahead. She traveled a fair amount for work, site visits, and vendor meetings, and I never thought anything of it. That was just her career, that was just who she was. The Fridays started in late September of the year we turned 40. She told me she had joined a book club, 8 women, someone's living room, rotating houses. She seemed genuinely enthusiastic about it, and I was glad. Renee had been quieter than usual that summer, a little withdrawn in ways I had filed under stress. A book club sounded like exactly what she needed. The first Friday she asked me to drop her off, I thought nothing of it. Her car was in the shop, the address was 20 minutes away, and it was raining. I pulled up to a nice house on a tree-lined street, and she grabbed her bag and her bottle of wine, and she squeezed my hand and said she'd text when she needed a ride home. I drove away thinking about whether I wanted Thai food or pizza. She was home by 11. She smelled like someone else's candles and white wine, and she seemed lighter than she had in months. I thought, good. This is good for her. The second Friday, same thing. Drop-off, same house, same stone path, her waving from the doorstep as I pulled away. By the third Friday, it had become just a thing we did. I would finish work. She would be ready by 6. I would drive her. I would come home, and she would text me around 10:30 to say she was getting a ride back with one of the women. She never needed a pickup after that first night. Someone always dropped her home. It was the 5th Friday when something small snagged in the back of my mind. She had come home around 11, and she was in the bathroom for a long time, and when she came to bed, her hair was slightly damp. I noticed it, and then I unnoticed it, the way you do when you don't want to follow a thought to where it goes. She'd probably used their shower. People do that. It was nothing. That is what I told myself. It was nothing. But that night I lay there in the dark and I ran back through the last few months, all those quiet evenings, all that gentle distance, and I felt something I had not expected to feel. Not anger, not suspicion, Something quieter than that. Something that sat in my chest like a stone I hadn't known was there. I didn't pick it up. I left it exactly where it was. I closed my eyes and I listened to her breathe beside me, and I told myself I was tired, and that tired men imagine things, and that tomorrow morning everything would look the way it always looked. It did. And the Friday after that came around, and I started the car, and I drove her there, and I watched her walk up that stone path, and I came home and I made myself dinner, and everything looked completely normal. Except for that stone in my chest. It was still there. And it was not getting any smaller. I want to tell you about a Tuesday in November, about 6 weeks into the Fridays, because that is the day I stopped being able to leave the stone alone. Renee had left her laptop open on the kitchen counter. She did that sometimes, just stepped away mid-task, and normally I would walk past it without a glance. I am not a snooping kind of person. I genuinely never was. But that morning I was reaching past it to get to the coffee maker, and the screen was right there, and I saw a name in the corner of an open browser tab. Not a message. Not anything explicit. Just a name on what looked like an event venue website. Daniel Ashworth, lead coordinator. I poured my coffee. I stood at the counter and drank half of it. Then I went to work. I told myself it was a vendor. Renee worked with dozens of people. Names floated through our house constantly. Caterers and florists and lighting technicians. Daniel Ashworth was probably someone she'd hired for a corporate gala. That was the most reasonable explanation, and I am a reasonable man, so I held on to it. But I Googled him that afternoon from my office. I don't know exactly why. His website came up immediately. Mid-30s, dark hair, the kind of easy smile that photographs well. Event coordination and venue management based locally. Nothing unusual. Nothing alarming. I closed the tab and went back to my spreadsheets and told myself I had just wasted 4 minutes of my life on nothing. The Fridays kept coming. I kept driving her. She kept coming home lighter, softer, easier to be around. And I kept telling myself that the book club was good for her and I should be glad. The thing that genuinely started to pull at me was not dramatic. It never is, in my experience. It was small. It was the wine. Renee always brought a bottle on Fridays. Always a specific one, a Malbec she liked, from a wine shop about 10 minutes from our house. I had driven past that shop 100 times. One afternoon in early November, I happened to be on that street for a work errand, and on impulse I stopped in. I don't know what I was looking for. I think I just wanted to feel normal for a minute, to buy a bottle of wine like a normal person and go home. The woman at the counter recognized me immediately. Said Renee came in every Thursday without fail. Same bottle, sometimes two. She said it warmly, the way people do when they think they are saying something nice. I smiled and said yes. She loves that Malbec. I paid and I left, and I sat in my car for a few minutes with the bottle on the passenger seat. Every Thursday, preparing for Friday. I drove home. I made dinner. When Renee got back from a work meeting that evening, she kissed me on the cheek and asked what smelled good, and I told her it was just pasta. Nothing special. That night I waited until she was asleep, and I sat at the kitchen table with my phone and I looked up the address of the book club house on our street map. I had driven there enough times that I knew the cross streets by heart. I typed in the address and looked at the satellite view, and then I typed in Daniel Ashworth and looked at his business address on his website, and then I sat very still for a moment. Because they were not the same street, but they were 4 blocks apart. 4 blocks. I put my phone face down on the table. I looked at the ceiling. There was a small water stain up there I had been meaning to check on for months, and I focused on that for a while, because it was easier than focusing on anything else. In the morning, Renee made eggs, and we talked about whether we needed to replace the gutters before winter, and she was warm and easy and completely herself, and I thought, maybe I have this wrong. Maybe I have built something enormous out of 4 blocks and a bottle of Malbec and a name on a browser tab. I am not an investigator. I am a man who avoids confrontation and sends back meals in his head. Maybe that is exactly what is happening here. Maybe I am constructing a crime scene out of coincidences because some part of me is scared of something I cannot even name. I almost let it go that morning. I was genuinely close. And then her phone buzzed on the counter while she was in the other room, and the screen lit up, and I was standing right there, and the preview said, "Friday still on?" And there was no name attached, just a number I did not recognize, and I watched the screen go dark again, and I did not move for a long time. She came back in, picked up her phone, read it, and typed a reply without her expression changing at all. Then she put the phone in her pocket and asked me if I wanted more coffee. I said yes. She poured it. We finished breakfast, and I sat across from her at that table, in our kitchen, in our house, on an ordinary Wednesday morning, and I thought, I need to know exactly what is happening before I say a single word. Because if I am wrong, I will have broken something that cannot be unbroken, and if I am right, I am going to need more than a text preview and a wine bottle and 4 blocks on a map. So I decided to keep driving her, every Friday, until I knew. If you have ever sat across from someone you loved and smiled through something that was eating you alive, you already know what the next few weeks felt like for Marcus. If this story is landing somewhere close to home for you, hit subscribe so you don't miss what comes next, because there are more stories like this one, and they do not all end the way you expect. I need to tell you about the driving, because that is the part nobody asks about, and it is the part that mattered most. 20 minutes there, 20 minutes home. 40 minutes every Friday where it was just me and the road and the radio and everything I was not saying. I tried music for the first few weeks. Then I tried podcasts. Then I stopped trying anything and just drove in silence and let my mind do whatever it needed to do. What surprised me was that I did not spend those drives in anger. I expected anger. I had always assumed that if something like this ever happened to me, anger would be the first thing through the door. But it wasn't. What came instead was something much quieter and much harder to carry. It was grief. A very specific kind of grief. The kind where the person is still right there, still sleeping beside you, still asking if you want more coffee, still laughing at the same shows, and you are already mourning them anyway. I grieved on those drives home. I grieved, and then I pulled into the driveway, and I went inside, and I made dinner, and I waited for her goodnight text. And by morning I had packed it all back down somewhere deep enough that I could sit across from her and be completely present and give nothing away. I do not say that with any pride. I say it because it is true, and because I think it is important to understand who I was becoming in those weeks, and what that kind of sustained silence does to a person over time. By December, I had confirmed 3 things I could not explain away. The address I dropped her at was registered to a Daniel Ashworth. I found that through a property search one evening when Renee was in the bath. The Friday texts came from the same unregistered number every single week without exception. And on 2 separate occasions, I had driven past the house at around 9:30 on my way back from a walk, and her friend Carol's car, which Renee had mentioned as her usual ride home, was nowhere on that street. Someone else was bringing her home. Every time. I still had not confronted her. I had not even come close. Because every time I built myself up to it, I would look at her across the dinner table and she would say something completely ordinary, something about a client or a grocery list or a show she wanted to watch, and all the words I had prepared would just dissolve. Because she was still her. She was still the woman from the Holiday Inn with the red suitcase, still the one who talked with her hands and laughed too loud. And I could not figure out how both things could be true at the same time. I needed to know before I spoke. That was the decision I kept coming back to. I needed to be standing on something solid. So I built the test quietly, over 2 weeks, and I want to be clear that it was not something I am particularly proud of. But it was careful, and it was specific, and it told me exactly what I needed to know. I told Renee on a Thursday evening in mid-December that I had a work trip the following Friday. Overnight, I said. A client dinner in Atlanta, early morning meeting. I'd be back Saturday afternoon. I said it casually, over dinner, the way you mention any ordinary thing. She nodded. She said, "Oh, that's fine. I'll just get a ride to book club and figure out the weekend." Her voice was even. Her hands stayed still. She did not reach for her phone. That was the first part of the test. The second part was simpler. I packed an overnight bag on Friday morning and I kissed her goodbye and I drove to a hotel 11 minutes from our house. And I checked in under my own name and I sat in that room and I ordered room service and I watched television and I waited. At 9:47 that night, I drove past the house on that tree-lined street. Renee's coat, the long charcoal one she only wore on cold evenings, was visible through the front window. There were two figures inside. I did not slow down. I drove past at normal speed and I went back to the hotel and I sat on the edge of the bed and I looked at the wall for a while. She texted me at 10:15. "Miss you already. Hope the dinner went well. Get some sleep." I typed back, "Dinner was great. Miss you too. Talk tomorrow." I put the phone on the nightstand and I lay down with my shoes still on, and I stared at the ceiling. I want to tell you what that moment felt like, because I think it is important and because it was not what I expected. I had spent weeks bracing for the confirmation. I had told myself that once I knew for certain, once there was no more explaining it away, I would feel something definitive. Relief maybe, or rage, or at least a clean, clear sense of what came next. What I actually felt was very ordinary, tired, just deeply, completely tired. The way you feel at the end of a very long day of very hard physical work, where your body has nothing left and your mind follows suit. I lay there in that hotel room, and I thought about the first apartment Renee and I had shared, a third-floor walk-up with a broken radiator and a view of a parking garage, and how we had thought it was the greatest place in the world. I thought about that for a long time. In the morning, I drove home. She was in the kitchen when I walked in, making coffee, wearing the gray sweater she always wore on weekend mornings. She smiled when she heard the door and said, "You're back early. How was Atlanta?" I said, "Atlanta was fine." I put my bag down. I accepted the coffee she handed me. I stood at the counter and I drank it and I looked at her and I thought, I know, and you do not know that I know, and I am not ready to change that yet, because I needed one more thing before I moved. I needed to understand why. Not to forgive it, not to fix it, just to understand it. I needed to hear it in a way that did not come from a confrontation, because confrontations let people prepare their answers. I needed it to come out the way true things come out, sideways when someone is not paying attention. So I kept driving her. 4 more Fridays. I kept my face even and my voice warm and my hands steady on the wheel. And I waited. The first thing I did in January was call a lawyer. Not a divorce lawyer, not yet. Just a family attorney a colleague had used 2 years earlier, a quiet woman named Patricia who worked out of a small office near the courthouse and who listened to everything I said without writing a single note, and then told me exactly what I needed to document and exactly how to do it. I left her office with a short list and a very clear head. The second thing I did was open a personal checking account at a different bank. I did not move money. I did not touch anything joint. I simply created a place that was mine, that existed outside of everything we had built together, and having it there felt like finding a handhold on a very steep wall. I told no one. Not my brother, not my closest friend Joel, not my mother. Partly because I was not ready for the questions that would follow, and partly because saying it out loud to someone who knew us both would make it a different kind of real. I was not prepared for that yet. I needed to stay functional. I needed to stay present. I needed to keep driving her on Fridays. Renee noticed something in mid-January. Not the account, not the lawyer. Something smaller. She asked me one evening if I was feeling all right, said I seemed somewhere else lately. I told her work was heavy, a project running long, nothing serious. She accepted that. She reached over and rubbed my shoulder the way she always did when she thought I was stressed, and I sat very still under her hand and kept my face completely neutral. That was one of the harder moments. Not because of anger, because of memory. Because her hand on my shoulder felt exactly the way it had always felt, and some part of me that I had not fully prepared for responded to it anyway. The accidental confession happened on a Friday evening in late January, and it did not happen the way I had imagined it would. I had dropped Renee off at the house as usual. I drove 2 blocks away and parked, which I had never done before. I was not planning to go back. I was not planning anything specific. I just did not feel like going home to an empty house that particular evening, and so I sat in the parked car with the engine off, and I listened to the radio for a while. About 40 minutes later, a car pulled up behind me and parked. I recognized it immediately. It belonged to a woman named Gail, who Renee had introduced me to at a neighborhood event the previous spring. Gail was one of the women in the book club, a real member of an actual group that apparently did meet, just not at this address and apparently not always with Renee. Gail did not see me. My car was dark, and she walked straight past, heading toward the house. I watched her in the rearview mirror. She knocked, and after a moment the door opened, and I could not hear the words, but I could see the body language shift immediately. Gail's posture changed. She stepped back slightly. Then she said something with her hands moving, and the door opened wider and she went inside. I sat there and I thought about leaving. I almost did. 12 minutes later, Gail came back out. She was on her phone now, walking quickly toward her car, and my window was cracked slightly because the car had gotten warm. And she passed close enough that I caught pieces of what she was saying. She said, "She needs to tell him," Gail said. "This has gone on long enough and he deserves to know the truth." Then a pause while she listened. Then, "I understand she's scared, but scared is not an excuse anymore at this point." She got in her car and drove away. I sat there for another few minutes. The radio was still on low, some song I did not know. So there it was. Not from Renee, not from Daniel. From a woman who had no idea I was parked 2 cars behind her, who was having the conversation I had been waiting 7 months to overhear. Scared. That was the word she used. Renee was scared. I drove home and I made dinner, and I thought about that word for the rest of the night. The confrontation happened the following Sunday, not because I had planned it for that day, because Renee came downstairs that morning and sat across from me at the kitchen table and looked at me in a way she had not looked at me in a very long time, and she said, "Marcus, I need to talk to you about something." And her voice was the voice of someone who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and has finally decided to put it down. I said, "Okay." She looked at her hands. She said his name. She said it had started the previous summer. She said it began as a work connection and became something she had not planned and did not know how to stop. She said she had been trying to end it for 2 months and could not find the courage. She said she was sorry in a way that sounded like she had rehearsed it and also like she meant every word. I listened to all of it. I did not interrupt. I did not raise my voice. When she finished, I was quiet for a moment, and then I said, "I know Renee. I have known for a while." The color left her face completely. I told her calmly, without drama, without a list of grievances. I told her I had been driving her there for months, that I had known the address, that I had done the overnight test in December. I told her I had spent that time getting my feet under me, not to punish her, but because I needed to be standing on solid ground before I had this conversation. She asked me why I kept driving her, why I hadn't said anything. I thought about that for a moment, and then I said, "Because I needed to understand something first." And I think I do now. She started to say something about fear, about feeling invisible for years, about things she had never said out loud, and I listened to that too. I did not agree with all of it. I did not think fear was a complete explanation, but I understood it as a human thing, a messy and imperfect human thing, and I did not need to argue with it. I just needed to hear it. Before I tell you what happened next, I want to ask you something. Have you ever had one single moment, just one small thing, that permanently changed the way you saw everything you thought you knew? Drop it in the comments below. I read every single one, and you would be surprised how many people are sitting with something that sounds exactly like this. 2 days later, she asked if we could talk again, if maybe there was a version of this where we tried to work through it. Her voice was careful and hopeful and very tired. I told her I needed some time before I could answer that. She nodded. She said she understood. She went upstairs. That night I sat in the kitchen alone for a long time. I thought about the stone in my chest, the one that had been there since October, and I noticed for the first time that it had not gotten heavier. It had actually gotten slightly smaller. Not gone, just smaller. I was not ready to call that progress. But I noticed it. Renee moved into her sister's place in early February. It was not a dramatic exit. There were no slammed doors, no final speeches delivered in the hallway. She packed 2 suitcases over a Saturday afternoon while I was out walking, and when I came back, the house felt different in a way that had nothing to do with what was missing from the closet. It felt like a held breath finally let go. She left a note on the kitchen counter. Short, handwritten, her looping cursive I had always loved. It said she was sorry for the way things had gone, that she hoped I was okay, that she would be in touch about next steps when I was ready. I read it twice, folded it, and put it in the drawer where we kept takeout menus and spare batteries and all the small things that don't have a better place to go. I stood in the kitchen for a while after that. Then I fed the dog. His name is Biscuit, a 7-year-old beagle who had no opinion about any of this and was simply very interested in his dinner, and I appreciated that about him more than I can say. The relapse attempt came 3 weeks later, which was faster than I expected, and also exactly as fast as some part of me had anticipated. Renee called on a Tuesday evening, and her voice was soft and careful, and she said she had been doing a lot of thinking, that she had ended things completely with Daniel, that she was seeing a therapist and working through what had led her there. She said she thought we owed it to 8 years to at least try. I listened to all of it. I did not interrupt. I had learned, over the previous months, that I was actually very good at listening when I was not also trying to manage my own reaction at the same time. When she finished, I said, "I hear you, Renee. I'm glad you're doing that work. I genuinely mean that." She waited. I said, "But I don't think I can go back. Not because I hate you, because I spent 53 Friday nights driving you to someone else's house and coming home alone. And somewhere in those drives I became a different version of myself, someone quieter, someone who knows what he will and won't absorb anymore. And that person cannot unsee what I saw." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I understand." And I think she did. Her voice did not collapse or spike. It settled, like someone accepting the weight of a thing they had been trying to put down for a long time. We said goodbye the way people say goodbye when they have genuinely loved each other and genuinely hurt each other, and have arrived finally at a place beyond both. Carefully, with respect, without anything left to prove. I put the phone down on the counter and I stood there in the kitchen, and Biscuit pushed his nose against my ankle, and I reached down and scratched his ear, and that was that. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. Patricia handled it cleanly, without conflict, without theater. Renee and I divided things the way people divide things when neither one is trying to win anymore. The house went on the market in April. I found a smaller place, a rental, first floor, hardwood floors, a back door that opened onto a small patio where I could sit in the morning with coffee and listen to the neighborhood wake up. I want to tell you about a morning in late September, because it is the morning I keep coming back to when I try to explain what recovery actually looks like from the inside. I woke up without an alarm. The light was coming in at that low autumn angle that makes everything look slightly golden, and Biscuit was already awake at the foot of the bed, and I lay there for a few minutes just listening. Birds. Someone's lawnmower 2 streets over. A car door closing. All of it completely ordinary and completely okay. I got up and made coffee and took it out to the patio. The maple in the corner of the yard had started to turn just at the edges, the way they do in early fall before the whole thing goes. I sat there and drank my coffee, and I did not think about Renee. And then I noticed that I was not thinking about her. And that felt like something worth sitting with for a moment. It was not happiness exactly, not the loud kind. It was something quieter and more durable than that. It was the feeling of a morning that belonged entirely to me. I thought about the drives, all 53 of them, the radio, The silence. The grief I had packed back down each time before walking through the door. I had spent a long time wondering if I should have said something sooner, acted faster, been the kind of man who confronts things head-on instead of driving them quietly to someone else's house for a year. I still don't have a clean answer to that. What I have instead is this. I moved when I had solid ground under my feet, and when the moment came I was steady, and I said what was true without destroying anyone in the process, and I can live with that. I reached down and scratched Biscuit behind his ear. He thumped his tail against the patio once, twice, then went back to watching the yard. The maple caught the light. I finished my coffee. There is a specific kind of strength that does not look like strength from the outside. It does not raise its voice. It does not arrive with perfect timing. It just quietly stops absorbing what it was never meant to carry, and it builds something solid in the space that opens up. And one morning it sits on a patio with a cup of coffee and realizes that the stone that lived in its chest for the better part of a year is finally, completely gone. If any part of Marcus's story landed close to something you are carrying right now, I want you to know you are not alone in that. Leave a comment below. Tell me the moment you realized something had quietly shifted in your own life, the small thing that changed everything. And if you want more stories like this one, subscribe, because there are more people like Marcus out there, and their stories deserve to be heard the same way his did. The maple kept turning, Biscuit kept watching the yard, and Marcus just sat there in the quiet, in the light, in the morning that was entirely his own.